My name is Claire Callahan, and this is the story of how my father died, and how everything I believed about him unraveled in the days that followed. It began with a phone call just past midnight. I remember the time clearly because I had just gotten into bed when the house phone rang. Not my cell. The landline. The kind of call you never want to answer. On the other end was a police officer, calm and rehearsed. My father, Thomas Callahan, had passed away. Alone. Peacefully. A heart attack, they suspected. I barely processed the words. I remember Daniel, my husband, taking the phone from my hand and finishing the conversation while I sat frozen, staring at the blank wall across the room. The next few days passed like a fog. My sister Emily flew in from Chicago, and together we made the arrangements. We buried him on a Thursday morning, under a dull Boston sky that seemed to mirror everything I felt inside. Mount Hope Cemetery was cold and quiet. The leaves had just started turning, falling in crisp waves across the paths. There weren't many people there, just a few neighbors, some of his old coworkers, and a cousin or two we hadn't seen in years. He would have wanted it that way. Simple. No drama, no excess. My father lived his life with quiet discipline. He'd been an accountant his whole adult life, never wealthy, but steady. Predictable. That's the word people always used about him. He raised me and Emily on his own after our mother died when I was 9. He cooked. He cleaned. He never dated again. He never left Boston. Thomas Callahan didn't chase anything except routine. And yet, as I stood by his coffin, I felt unsettled. I can't explain it. The moment they lowered him into the ground, something tightened in my chest. Not just grief, something sharper. A whisper at the edge of reason. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was Daniel, who stood beside me so still, watching more closely than seemed natural. His hand was firm on mine, but his body was tense, like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. I didn't ask him then. I couldn't. Everything felt too fragile. I had to be the strong one, the composed daughter, the one who didn't break down. But inside, I was crumbling. I kept thinking of the last conversation I had with my father, a week before he died. He'd mentioned headaches. That's all. Just a small complaint. Must be the weather, he'd said. I told him to rest more. He chuckled and changed the subject. That was it. That was the last thing he ever said to me. No final words of wisdom. No signs of fear. No goodbyes. Only silence. I remember the moment Daniel leaned toward me. We were standing by the casket, watching the final handfuls of dirt fall onto the polished wood. People had begun to drift away, but I stayed rooted, staring at the ground as if something buried down there still needed to speak. Daniel hadn't said much all morning. He'd helped with the arrangements, driven us to the cemetery, offered quiet support like he always did. But there was something in the way he kept glancing at my father's face during the service, something unreadable in his expression. Then, as we stood side by side, he turned slightly and whispered, low and deliberate, "Something's not right here." I didn't react at first. His voice was barely above a breath, but the words hit me like a slap. I turned to him slowly, but he didn't meet my eyes. He kept staring ahead, jaw tense, as if he hadn't said anything at all. "What do you mean?" I whispered back, my heart suddenly racing. He didn't answer. Not right away. His fingers squeezed mine just slightly, a silent signal to let it go for now. Later, he said under his breath, "Not here." The chill that had settled in my bones since the funeral started now twisted into something darker, an unease I couldn't place. I wanted to press him, but everything around us was still. Emily was hugging an aunt a few feet away, someone was crying softly behind us, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth and dead leaves. It wasn't the time. I nodded, almost imperceptibly, but my mind was already spiraling. Daniel was not the type to be dramatic. He was calm, rational, methodical, the same reasons I had fallen in love with him. He was also a doctor. A good one. trained to observe, to see things others might miss. If he said something felt off, I had to believe he saw something I hadn't. But what? It was a heart attack. The report was clean. No signs of struggle, no trauma. At least that's what the officer on the phone had said. So why would Daniel say that now, at the graveside, without warning or explanation? On the drive home, the silence between us was thick. Emily had taken her own car, so it was just the two of us. I waited for him to speak, but he kept his eyes on the road, hands firm on the wheel. Finally, I couldn't hold it any longer. "Daniel," I said softly, "what did you mean back there?" He hesitated. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't say anything. Then he exhaled slowly. "There was a mark," he said. "On his neck." I only saw it for a second when they opened the casket before the service. "A mark?" I repeated, confused. "A bruise. A small one, right under the jawline." It looked off. I stared at him. "But the report said heart attack." "I know," he said. "But Claire, I've seen enough bruises to know what they usually mean. This didn't look like a fall. It looked like pressure." My stomach dropped. The wind outside howled as we passed the Charles River, and I suddenly felt cold in a way I hadn't during the entire funeral. "You think someone hurt him?" I asked, barely able to say the words. "I don't know," he said, eyes still on the road. "But something about that mark doesn't sit right with me." I sat back in my seat, heart pounding. For the first time since the call, a crack formed in the wall I had built to hold back the grief. Doubt leaked through it like ice water. We didn't talk much that night. After the funeral, Emily stayed with some cousins, and Daniel and I returned to our house in Cambridge. It was quiet, too quiet. I kept hearing the echo of his words over and over, a bruise, under the jawline, pressure. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it away, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering every detail of my father's face in that casket. The next morning, while Daniel made coffee, I sat at the kitchen table, arms wrapped around myself like they could shield me from the possibilities growing in my mind. I had to ask. Could it have been something else? I said. Something harmless? Daniel set the mug down gently in front of me before sitting across the table. "Claire, I didn't want to say anything yesterday. Not with your family around. But that bruise wasn't an accident." He didn't rush the words. He was careful, deliberate, just like in everything he did. "It was small," he continued. "But it looked like it came from fingers. Thumb here," he gestured to the side of his own neck, "and the rest curled under. That kind of pressure can collapse the carotid artery. It can look like a heart attack. Especially in older men." I stared at him, trying to breathe evenly. "But why would someone?" He shook his head. "I don't know. I just know what I saw." My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to call it a stress response, a misinterpretation, anything, but Daniel wasn't guessing. He was trained for this. And then something stirred in my memory. "Dad had been complaining about headaches," I said quietly. Daniel's eyes sharpened. "When?" "A few weeks ago. He said it was probably just age, or maybe tension. But it wasn't like him to even mention things like that." "Did he see a doctor?" I shook my head. "I don't think so." He brushed it off. Daniel leaned back in his chair, thoughtful now. If someone was applying regular pressure, threatening him, maybe those headaches could have been a sign of stress, or worse. It's speculative, but it's not out of the question. My fingers clenched around the warm ceramic mug. My father had always seemed so solid, so unshakable. The idea that someone might have hurt him or scared him into silence felt unreal. Like trying to imagine the sun forgetting how to rise. We drove to his house later that afternoon. It still smelled like him, old books, strong coffee, and the faintest trace of cedar from the wardrobe he'd had since before I was born. Everything was untouched. His shoes by the door, his reading glasses folded neatly on the side table, the crossword puzzle from the Sunday paper only half finished. It didn't feel like the home of a man preparing to die. It felt paused. Like he'd stepped out and was due to return any moment. I walked through each room slowly, eyes scanning every surface, waiting for something to make sense. In his bedroom, I opened drawers, looked beneath the bed, behind frames, inside old jackets. Nothing. No notes. No sign of concern. No hint of fear. But something kept nagging at me. My father was precise. If he had sensed danger, he wouldn't have ignored it. He would have left a trace. And then, in his study, something odd caught my eye. A book, American Tax Reform, Volumes 1 and 2, rested awkwardly on the shelf, as if it had been returned in haste. I pulled it down and found a piece of paper sticking out, not quite hidden, but not meant to be obvious either. The message was handwritten, in my father's exacting script: "If something happens to me, check the locked drawer in the study." My heart stopped. I read the note over and over again, my fingers trembling. The words were so calm, so matter-of-fact, that it made them even more terrifying. If something happens to me. My father had known. He hadn't just suspected danger, he had expected it. I called Daniel into the study. He looked at the note, his expression tightening, then immediately turned to the desk. The drawer in question was the bottom one, thicker than the rest, with a small lock we'd never paid attention to. I tried the handle. Of course, it was locked. The key, if it had ever been left behind, wasn't in any obvious place. Emily arrived while we were still searching. I hadn't called her, she just showed up, as if something had pulled her here. When I showed her the note, she didn't say a word. She just stared at it, jaw tight, then turned and went to the kitchen. A minute later, she returned with a small metal rod from one of Dad's tool drawers. "Stand back," she said. The lock gave way after a few forceful strikes. The drawer groaned open, revealing a shallow, padded interior lined with brown felt. At first, it seemed empty. Then Emily lifted a flap of fabric, and beneath it, nestled in the center, was a black USB flash drive. We exchanged a glance. No label, no markings. Just a small, cold piece of plastic. Back at home, Daniel plugged the flash drive into his laptop. It held only one file, a video, timestamped 3 weeks before Dad's death. I could hardly breathe as Daniel clicked play. The screen lit up with my father's face, framed tightly in the dim light of his study. He looked tired. Not sick, but burdened, like he hadn't slept in days. His hands were clasped together, knuckles white. "If you're watching this," he began, "then something's happened to me." His voice was steady, but there was tension behind it. He paused, glanced off camera, then continued. "I didn't want to drag anyone into this. Not Claire, not Emily. But things have escalated. I'm being followed. Someone contacted me, someone from the past. He's trying to keep me quiet." He leaned closer to the lens. I could see the worry in his eyes. "I did something. Years ago. Not illegal, but I covered for someone who did. I thought it was over. I thought the past had buried itself. But it's back." The image flickered. He shifted uncomfortably. He said if I talked, he'd make sure I disappeared before I ever could. I tried to reach out, to fix it the right way, but I think it's too late. The video ended abruptly. No name. No direct accusation. Just a shadow of a threat and a man clearly scared for his life. I sat back, stunned. Emily whispered, "Who is he talking about?" Only one name surfaced in my mind, slow and heavy, like something long buried breaking through the earth: Marcus Keller. I hadn't thought of him in over a decade. My father's former partner. The one who vanished after the scandal. The one whose name was never spoken again. The silence after the video ended was unbearable. Daniel closed the laptop, and for a moment, we just sat there, not speaking, the air thick with disbelief. My father, so measured, so cautious, had been terrified. And we had never seen it. He had hidden it all beneath his routines, his quiet way of living, his small talk and his crossword puzzles. Behind all of that, he had been watching his back. Emily was the first to speak. "Marcus Keller," she said, like the name tasted bitter. "You think that's who he meant?" I nodded slowly. Who else would he be that afraid of? 12 years ago, Marcus Keller was my father's business partner. Together, they ran a small but respected accounting firm downtown. Then, one spring, the firm collapsed almost overnight. There was a federal investigation, whispers of fraud, offshore accounts, missing client money. And just like that, Marcus vanished. My father had cooperated with investigators, but his name never appeared in any formal charges. He retired the following year and never once mentioned Marcus again. Now, all of it came rushing back like a tide. Daniel stood and began pacing. If your father left that message, it means he believed the danger wasn't hypothetical. He was scared. That bruise on his neck, it lines up. I rubbed my temples, trying to process it all. But he didn't say Marcus by name. No, Emily said, but you heard the way he said someone from the past. That's not a coincidence. Who else would fit? My heart pounded. I need to know if Marcus is still around. Daniel nodded. I'll check medical licensing databases, business registries, even court records. If he resurfaced anywhere in the past few years, I'll find it. While he worked, I went through Dad's things again. I wasn't ready to let go of the hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd left more clues. Something to bridge the years between then and now. The flash drive had been his warning, but it wasn't the whole story. I searched through drawers, old boxes, photo albums. I ran my fingers over his meticulous handwriting, his marginal notes in dusty tax books. And I kept wondering, when had it started? When did he begin looking over his shoulder? Had he told anyone else? Then I remembered something. 2 months ago, he'd called me just after dinner. He'd asked an odd question about password managers, wondering if digital safes could store important documents that needed to outlive the owner. At the time, I thought it was just his usual curiosity. But now, it felt like a breadcrumb. Daniel returned late that night, a look on his face I didn't like. I found something, he said. Marcus is back in Boston. Quietly. He's listed as a consultant for a private firm under a new LLC. The name's different, but it's him. The address traces to a building near the financial district. So he had returned. He had buried himself again, under layers of paper and silence. But my father had found him. Or maybe Marcus had found my father first. The man who vanished had come back. And my father had paid for it. The more I thought about Marcus Keller, the harder it was to believe I had once known him. He wasn't just some old business partner of my father's. He had been around our house for years, Sunday dinners, backyard barbecues, holidays when my mother was still alive. I remembered his laugh, his leather briefcase, the way he always brought me a little chocolate from the corner store. As a child, I'd thought of him as a second uncle. Then one day, he was gone. No explanation. No goodbyes. His name became a ghost, something I noticed only by its absence. My father never spoke of him again. If Emily ever asked about him, I don't remember. I certainly didn't. Back then, we were told not to worry. The business had ended, Dad had retired, and life had gone on. But now, the return of that name felt like a fault line splitting under my feet. Daniel and I sat side by side at the dining table, the laptop open between us. He had pulled up a string of business filings, tax IDs, and public records. Marcus Keller was now operating under the alias MK Advisory Group, listed as a strategic consultant for a tech startup that handled secure communications software, ironically, the kind that erased messages and encrypted emails beyond recovery. He's hiding in plain sight, Daniel said. But he's careful. No direct ownership. Just advisory roles. No photographs. No interviews. But it's him. I looked at the address. It was less than 5 miles from where Dad used to live. Do you think he came to the house? I asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. It's possible. Especially if he thought your father was going to talk. That would explain the threat. I stared at the screen, a dull ache building behind my eyes. My father didn't deserve this. Daniel touched my hand. He tried to warn us. That flash drive, the video, it wasn't just for you. He knew he might not get the chance to tell anyone face to face. But the flash drive hadn't named Marcus. It hadn't provided proof. All we had was a whisper, a bruise, and a ghost from the past. Emily came over the next morning. She had barely slept, and the circles under her eyes made her look older. I told her everything we had found. Her reaction surprised me. I never trusted him, she said. Marcus? She nodded. There was something about him, even when we were kids. He always smiled too easily. Said the right things at the right time. But I caught him once, arguing with Dad in the garage. Late at night. I must have been 12. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because they stopped talking after that. And I figured whatever it was, Dad had handled it. But he hadn't. Or maybe he had, for a while. And then Marcus came back. We needed more than suspicions. More than memories. I suggested we speak to the medical examiner who had signed off on the death certificate. If the cause of death could be questioned, then everything else might open up. Daniel made the call. He retired last year, he said, after hanging up. But I found the officer who signed the incident report. Detective Ramirez. Still active. We drove to the precinct together. The building was old, with flickering lights and stale coffee in the air. When we met Detective Ramirez, he was polite but guarded. You're Thomas Callahan's daughter? He asked, flipping through a file on his desk. Heart failure. Natural causes. Daniel spoke up. There was bruising on his neck. I'm a physician. It didn't look natural. Ramirez stiffened slightly. I didn't examine the body. That was handled by a third-party mortuary service. We were short-staffed. He sounded defensive. Nervous, even. I leaned forward. Detective, is there any reason someone might have wanted to rush this case through? He didn't answer. But his silence was loud. Detective Ramirez didn't say much after that. He handed us a copy of the incident report, thin, basic, no mention of the bruise. Then he stood, wished us luck, and walked away without looking back. It wasn't a dismissal. It was avoidance. I could feel it in the way he moved, like someone who knew more than he was willing to admit but wasn't ready to carry the weight of it. Back in the car, Daniel was quiet. His jaw clenched the way it did when he was thinking hard, processing. I knew better than to interrupt. He drove us home, and as soon as we got through the door, he opened his laptop and began digging. Public records. Mortuary services. Medical reports. Contracts. I watched from the couch, the room growing darker as the day slipped away, and I kept hearing my father's voice from the video. I thought the past had buried itself. But it hadn't. It had followed him. Emily came by again that evening. She'd brought takeout, but none of us touched the food. When I told her about Ramirez's hesitation, she frowned. If a third party handled the body, there must be a record. They don't just show up and vanish. Daniel kept typing. There are dozens of funeral homes and mortuary services contracted by the city, he said. But most don't work on site. They pick up, handle prep, and transport. I found one that matches the timeline, Barrow and Healy Mortuary Services. He pulled up their website. A generic page, no real contact information beyond a form and a P.O. box address. That struck all three of us as wrong. Who doesn't list a phone number? Emily asked. Daniel nodded. Exactly. This smells wrong. We started making calls to hospitals, medical transport companies, even city offices, asking who had handled Thomas Callahan's body. No one gave us a straight answer. Either they didn't know, didn't remember, or transferred us endlessly. Then, around 10 o'clock, Daniel found something, a contract filed under a different city vendor system. It listed Barrow and Healy as a subcontractor. The parent company? A security and logistics firm with no experience in funerary care. They're not real, he said. At least, not in the way they claim. My stomach turned. So whoever picked up my father's body wasn't a mortuary service? Not a legitimate one, Daniel said. Emily looked at us both. Then someone was making sure the body never got a proper exam. That was when it hit me, this wasn't just about fear. This was about control. Someone had gone to the trouble of intercepting his body, covering up marks, bypassing autopsy procedures. Someone with money, connections, or both. And someone who knew exactly how long to wait before disappearing again. We were silent for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I got up and walked into my father's old coat closet, now half empty, the scent of cedar still faint in the lining. I found his winter jacket, heavy wool, black buttons. In one of the inside pockets, something hard shifted. I reached in and pulled out a folded paper. It was a bank transfer receipt. Dated 3 weeks before his death. A large withdrawal from an unknown offshore account. Signed not by my father, but someone else. Someone named Marcus K. Emily held the paper in her hands like it might shatter. Her eyes scanned the signature again and again. This is real, she said softly. This is his signature. Or at least, it's someone trying damn hard to make it look like his. I took the receipt back and turned it over. The numbers were clean, calculated, $120,000, moved from a ghost account in the Cayman Islands to a private domestic fund. The name at the bottom wasn't my father's. It was Marcus Keller's. We had our link now. Something real. Something tangible. But it wasn't enough. We need more, Daniel said, reading my thoughts aloud. Enough to show this was a pattern. Not an accident. That night, we tore through the house again. Every box. Every file. Every drawer. The orderly home my father kept became a landscape of opened containers and scattered paper. I checked behind paintings, beneath floorboards, even inside old furniture. Emily, though, had a different idea. She headed up to the attic. I found her there almost an hour later, crouched near the back corner behind the water heater, flashlight in one hand and a thick envelope in the other. Her eyes were wide. You need to see this, she said. Inside the envelope was a folder, old, worn, but neatly organized. A label across the front read simply, for C or E only. Claire or Emily. He had meant for us to find it. Somehow, someday. We opened it on the attic floor. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Printed emails. Bank. Transfers. Copies of wire communications. A scanned letter signed under duress. And at the heart of it, a summary handwritten in my father's careful script. He explained how the fraud began, not by him, but through Marcus. Years ago, Marcus had approached him with a proposal to adjust figures for a few high-value clients. My father refused. Marcus had done it anyway. The firm became compromised. The FBI got involved. But Marcus had vanished, and my father had taken the blame in silence to avoid the collapse of others' lives, employees, partners, families. Years passed. He thought it was over. Then, 3 months before his death, Marcus reached out. Not in person. An encrypted email. He wanted money. Silence. Compliance. He threatened exposure. Threatened to drag my father into the mud after all these years if he didn't play along. And then, when Dad started pulling away, when he realized he couldn't go through with it, he started receiving real threats. Notes under his door. Dead silence on the phone line when he picked up. A car parked outside the house for hours at a time. Daniel looked over the bank transfers. He was trying to buy time. Emily turned pale. He didn't want to die with this hanging over us. Buried in the middle of the folder was a printed image, Marcus, grainy, standing near a glass building downtown, wearing dark sunglasses and holding a briefcase. The metadata on the image showed it was taken by a disposable camera. Probably by my father. We had everything now: motive, money trail, visual confirmation, and Marcus's reappearance. But there was one thing still missing. Proof that my father had tried to report it. And that meant one place left to check: government records. The FBI. The next morning, I couldn't sit still. I felt like every breath was pushing against a wall that refused to budge. We had everything except confirmation that my father had tried to speak up. That was the piece I needed. Not just for the authorities, but for myself. To know he didn't go quietly. Daniel made the call. He had a contact from residency who now worked in federal forensic pathology. A quiet conversation, a few vague questions, and then finally, a lead. He was in contact with the Bureau, Daniel told me. Not officially, but they have notes from an anonymous source, codename Oakridge. They linked it to your father's computer IP address. Oakridge, I whispered. That was the name of the cabin he took us to every summer. Daniel nodded. It's him. He was cooperating. Trying to provide evidence on Marcus, step by step. But then, something shifted. He pulled up the internal note his contact had shared. My father had begun regular uploads, files, names, company movements. All clean. All clear. But 5 days before his death, he stopped. No explanation. No message. Just silence. Either he got scared, Daniel said, or someone found out. Emily leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. Or both. We stared at the laptop screen for a long time. The name Oakridge at the top of the log burned into my mind. He had been trying to protect us all along. Even in secret. Then Daniel said something I hadn't expected. There's a pattern in these uploads. Look at the IP log. He used his home network for most of them. But one of them, just one, came from a different address. He ran the location. Claire, that's your house. I blinked. What? 3 weeks before he died. He must have come over and sent one of the files from your Wi-Fi. I tried to remember. A vague memory surfaced. He had stopped by to drop off some books I'd left at his place. He'd insisted on waiting for me to get home, even though he usually just left things by the door. I'd offered him coffee, but he only stayed 20 minutes. I never saw him touch his phone or computer. He wanted the Bureau to know he wasn't alone, Daniel said. Or maybe, he was trying to protect himself, tying us to the message so it couldn't be ignored. A bitter thought settled in. It hadn't been enough. Someone close to him helped cover this up, Emily said. We all fell quiet. My mind started replaying things. People. Behavior. The way Emily had known about the bruising. The fact that she hadn't seemed surprised when we found the note in the book. How quickly she had opened the locked drawer. Too quickly. Emily, I said slowly. You've been helping me this whole time. But, why didn't you ever ask to see the body? She looked at me, her face unreadable. Because I already knew what I'd see. I stared at her. I didn't kill him, she said. But I knew he was in danger. He told me, just once. He was scared. And I didn't do anything. I thought it would blow over. She sat down, her voice low. I hired someone to watch the house. A private firm. Just to make sure. But something went wrong. The night he died, I got a call. No one spoke. Just breathing. And I never told anyone. Daniel stood still, stunned. You hired security? He asked. She nodded. I thought it would help. I didn't know it would make things worse. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, reliving Emily's confession on a loop. She had tried to protect him, hired a private security company. But something had gone wrong. Very wrong. A phone call with only breathing on the line? That wasn't a warning. It was a message. The next morning, Daniel started reviewing the neighborhood security feeds. He had contacted one of the local homeowners associations, people he knew from when he worked nearby, and requested access to footage from the night my father died. Hours passed with no progress. Then, around noon, Daniel's voice cut through the silence. "Claire. I've got something." I rushed to his side. On the screen was a grainy nighttime recording from a doorbell camera across the street from my father's house. The timestamp read 11:46 at night, the night before the police called me. A dark-colored car, sedan, nondescript, pulled up and stopped. In front of the house. The headlights stayed off. It sat there. Idling. For 28 minutes. No one got out. No one went in. At least not on camera. "What kind of car is that?" I asked. Daniel zoomed in. "No plates on the front. But look at the windshield, there's a security badge." He paused the video and enhanced the frame. The badge was blurry, but legible enough to reveal a logo and a partial name, Sentinel Strategic Services. Emily appeared in the doorway. Her face paled when she saw the screen. "That's the company I hired," she said. "That's them." My heart dropped. "You said they were there to protect him." "They were," she insisted. "I paid extra for night surveillance." "That was their car." "But they never got out," Daniel said, voice hard. "They didn't check on him. Didn't call anyone. And the next morning, he was dead." Emily sat down, eyes wide with shock. "They were supposed to report to me. Daily updates. I stopped getting them the day before he died. I thought it was just a system issue. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My thoughts were sprinting in every direction. We had a private firm, hired with good intentions, now linked to my father's final hours. And we had silence where there should have been action." Daniel didn't stop. He pulled up a license plate recognition database he had access to from his hospital's security department, another favor called in, another gray area walked through. After some digging, he found the rear plate from a passing traffic camera. It matched the car from the video. It was registered to Omnitech Security Solutions, a subsidiary of Sentinel Strategic. He pulled up the company's records. And then we saw it, one of the listed consultants, Marcus Keller. Emily gasped. "He's everywhere," I whispered. "He's behind the money, the threats, the firm. He embedded himself in the company you trusted to protect Dad." Emily looked sick. "I didn't know. I swear, Claire. I just wanted him safe." But she had unknowingly brought the wolf to the door. That car hadn't come to protect him. It had come to make sure no one else would. I couldn't speak for a while. My mind was a whirlpool, spinning between disbelief and fury. Emily sat across from me on the edge of the couch, her hands limp in her lap, her mouth slightly open as if trying to form words she couldn't find. "You hired them," I said finally, each word deliberate. "You brought them in. And Marcus, he was inside that company." "I didn't know," she said again, voice raw. "I checked their credentials. They looked legitimate. I never even saw the consultant list. I just wanted someone to keep eyes on the house. Dad didn't want police involved. He didn't want to file anything. He was scared. So I tried to help." I could see the truth in her eyes. The guilt was devouring her. But that didn't make the weight of her mistake any lighter. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "About the phone call. About the security." She looked down. "Because I knew it would make everything worse. You were already overwhelmed. I thought, maybe it would just fade. Maybe if we stayed quiet, nothing else would happen. I didn't think he would die. Daniel stood in the corner, arms folded, jaw set. But someone made sure he did. That car was there for nearly half an hour. And no one inside it lifted a finger. Emily ran both hands through her hair. He called me that night, Claire. I didn't answer. I saw his name on the screen, and I froze. I was tired, I figured I'd call him back in the morning. But then, a few minutes later, I got another call. Unknown number. I picked up. No voice. Just breathing. Slow. Purposeful. She was shaking now. I should have gone over. I should have done something. I failed him. No, I said, not out of forgiveness, but because it was bigger than just her. You didn't fail him. Marcus did. You were manipulated. The same way Dad was. The same way I might have been if I'd been the one he called that night. Still, something didn't sit right. Why did he call you, Emily? I asked slowly. Why not me? She hesitated. Because I already knew what he was afraid of. He'd told me, weeks before. Not everything. But enough to scare me. I stared. You knew he was in danger, and you didn't tell me? I thought I could fix it. Her voice cracked. I didn't want to drag you in. I thought if I handled it quietly, he'd be okay. But I wasn't fast enough. I didn't see how deep it went. Daniel looked up from his laptop. Claire, there's something else. He turned the screen toward me. There was a second folder on the flash drive, one we'd missed, buried beneath layers of junk data. It was encrypted but not professionally. Daniel cracked the password in minutes. Inside, another video. I clicked play. My father appeared on the screen again, this time under brighter light. His face was strained but steady. If you're seeing this, it means I didn't get out. I've hidden everything in a safe deposit box. The bank on Devon Street. Box number 88. The key is behind the furnace in the attic. You'll need both of you, Claire and Emily. I left a letter for each. He leaned closer. And I'm sorry. For not saying more when I had the chance. The video ended. I looked at Emily. She was crying now, but she nodded. Let's go, she said. Let's finish this. We were ready. We didn't speak much on the drive to Devon Street. The streets blurred past, early morning light filtering through the windshield in thin gray streaks. Emily clutched the small, brass key in her hand, dusty, slightly bent, exactly where our father said it would be, taped to the back of the furnace, behind old boxes and forgotten insulation. He had known we'd come. He had trusted us, even after everything. The bank was one of those old, stone-faced buildings tucked between newer glass offices, the kind that looked unchanged since the 1950s. It smelled like polished wood and iron vaults. We checked in at the front desk, showed our IDs, and signed the necessary forms. The clerk led us down to the deposit room in silence. Box 88 was tucked into a lower row. I inserted the key. It clicked softly. Inside, a thick manila envelope. Nothing else. Emily and I stared at it for a second, then she nodded. You do it. I lifted the envelope carefully and carried it to the private viewing table. My hands shook as I opened it. There were papers. Dozens. Each in a protective sleeve, all numbered and sorted. Letters with Marcus's signature. Bank agreements. Scanned contracts. One folder labeled simply, SSS Operations. Inside were detailed memos from Sentinel Strategic Services, meeting minutes, financial ties, internal reports. And there, bold and unavoidable, was Marcus's name across the top of several of them. Not as a consultant, but as an executive advisor with partial ownership. He hadn't just infiltrated the firm Emily hired. He had helped build it. This is everything, Daniel whispered behind me. He had joined us a few minutes after we arrived, unable to stay away. This proves Marcus was running illegal surveillance, manipulating contracts, and using the company to control and eliminate threats. Buried near the bottom was a small, sealed envelope marked Claire. Another, identical, marked Emily. My fingers hesitated. Then I opened mine. It was handwritten, careful, each word familiar in its rhythm. Claire, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect you from the storm. I tried to shield you from the worst of it, but I realize now that you deserved the truth. You always asked the right questions, even when I didn't want to answer them. I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. I thought I had more time. I thought I could outsmart Marcus. I was wrong. But I never doubted you would find your way to the truth. You always did. Use this. Don't let him escape again. With all my love, Dad. I sat there for a long time, letter in hand, heart pounding. Emily opened hers in silence. When she finished reading, she didn't speak. She just reached out and placed her hand over mine. We left the bank with the entire dossier in a locked box. By the time we handed it to the FBI field office that afternoon, the agents barely waited to finish reading before stepping into action. One of them looked at us, his expression hard and impressed at once. You've done most of our job for us. No part of it felt like victory. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, the silence I carried inside me began to ease. The arrest made the news the following week. Not front page. Just a clean, quiet headline buried beneath louder stories: former executive under investigation for financial crimes, conspiracy. No mugshot. No mention of my father. Just the initials of companies, vague allusions to fraud, and a list of sealed court documents. But we knew the truth. Marcus Keller was taken into federal custody on a Thursday morning outside his office building. No dramatic chase. No handcuffs in public view. Just two agents in plain suits, one calm conversation, and a quiet escort into the back of a black car. He didn't fight. Maybe he knew it was over. I didn't attend the arraignment. I didn't need to. Emily went, standing in the back of the courtroom, watching him from behind as the charges were read aloud. She called me after, her voice distant. He didn't look like I remembered, she said. Smaller. Older. Just a man. Not the monster we had imagined. Not the shadow that had haunted our father's final days. Just a man who chose power over decency and never looked back. Emily didn't speak much after that. She moved back to Chicago a few weeks later. We still talk, softly, carefully, but something fundamental shifted between us. Not blame. Not anger. Just a quiet space, shaped by the weight of what she carried and what she had lost. I visited the cemetery again in October. The leaves were back, red and gold, and falling in soft waves. It was colder this time. I brought fresh flowers, white lilies, his favorite. I sat beside the headstone and read the letter again. His handwriting still felt warm in my hands. For the first time, I spoke out loud to the grave. I told him everything. About Marcus. About the flash drive. About Emily's mistake and her guilt. About the safe deposit box and the envelopes. About how he had given us exactly what we needed, even when we didn't know we were looking. And then I sat in silence, letting the cold settle into my coat, my hands. The quiet wasn't as heavy now. It wasn't hollow. It was peace. Daniel joined me later, walking up the hill with 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside me, handed me one without a word, and looked at the headstone. We didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, he said, "He prepared you for this." I looked at him. "You think so?" He nodded. "He didn't leave you in the dark. He gave you the map." I sipped the coffee. It was warm, bitter, familiar. Like home. "I miss him," I said. "I know," Daniel replied. "But now, there's nothing left hidden. And that was true. No more secrets. No more unanswered questions. No more late-night whispers or signs ignored. My father had lived a quiet life, and his death had cracked open something none of us had expected. But he had left us more than grief. He had left us the truth. And that, in the end, was enough.